Welcome to Midweek, Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly facilitated spiritual practice with a Quaker flavor and an experimental ethos. My name is Jen, and I'm the program manager here at Beacon Hill Friends House, where I live and work. The Friends House is a Quaker center for learning and action and an intentional residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. We're based in downtown Boston. And tonight we have Mason Mennenga with the practice Blackout Bible. So sometimes faith or spiritual journeying can operate like a perennial. So a beautiful plant might shrivel and lose its leaves, deconstructing its body while its root remains underground, only to reconstruct itself into a plant anew in another season. In a spiritual journey, deconstruction is about breaking down the assumptions of our faith, understanding what they rest on, and asking questions about whether those are the roots we want to keep around. Reconstruction is about creating anew, asking ourselves how we might grow the roots we do want to keep so they flourish and thrive. We can also apply these concepts to scripture, which for many people can bring the baggage of past faith traditions that may have harmed us. In this practice, Mason will guide us into an opportunity to engage with these concepts and with the Bible to create scripture that enlivens and liberates us. Okay, so now I'm excited to introduce you to Mason. Mason Mennenga is an aspiring theologian, podcaster, YouTuber, and the internet's youth pastor. You can learn more about Mason at masonmennenga.com, and I'll put a link to that in the chat. So again, welcome. We're happy that you've joined us, and Mason, it is all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's so great to be with all of you. I really have a kindred spirit with Quakers, so I'm really excited to be a part of this practice and being a part of this group. I don't know if you all are Quakers or if only some of you are Quakers, but I'm really, really grateful to be with all of you today. So we're going to engage in a practice called Blackout Bible. So let me pull up my presentation for it. So with that said, we're going to be practicing Blackout Bible. And no, this is not a practice where we're all going to get drunk and just read the Bible together. Although if you invite me back, that might be what we do. Jennifer did a great job introducing myself. I'm a podcaster and YouTuber, and I do a lot of my theological work out in the public. And so if you want to call me a public theologian, feel free to do that. That's your prerogative. I don't know if I necessarily identify with that, but anyhow. To start with this practice, I want to kind of give you some context. I'm going to give you a little bit of theology because that's what I do, and then we'll actually do the actual practice. So with that said, I grew up in a conservative evangelical home. I grew up in that context, and some of you might have grown up in that context as well. And so many of you who did know what it's like to read the Bible in these really literal ways. So much so that when you were reading the Bible in those ways, and then maybe you moved away from that kind of way of reading the Bible and you moved to different kind of forms of faith, whether it was in the Christian faith or whether it was outside of the Christian faith, you started to realize there were parts of the Bible you don't quite like, and you wish you could erase parts of those parts of the Bible. Well, here's your chance. You have more than enough permission for me tonight to actually erase parts of those Bible verses. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about the theology behind, or what I think should be the theology behind a practice like Blackout Bible. So let me start out with my favorite theologian in the entire world, and her name is Catherine Keller. And she's got this great quote where she says, "To deconstruct is not to destroy, but to expose our constructed assumptions." So you might have heard this word deconstruction thrown around, especially within the last few years. A lot of people talk about deconstructing their faith. And a lot of times when they mean that, they're moving away from a given faith that they grew up with and moved to a different kind of form of faith. And so they talk about that process as deconstruction. But the thing to keep in mind is deconstruction is not necessarily destruction, which this cat might think is the case. So implied in this notion of deconstruction is construction. The two are very inseparable. So when you're deconstructing something, you're also constructing something and vice versa. So I think it's more accurate to talk about deconstruction as if it had like a slash in the middle or in the beginning part of the word between de and construction. And I think what this slash signifies is that every time that we deconstruct something, we're also creating something new in the process. And every time that we create something new, we're also deconstructing something at that same time. So this slash in this word is sort of this like continual, never-ending cycle of deconstructing and questioning our assumptions about certain things, and then constructing something new out of that. So it's this continual cycle that never ends. So when you're deconstructing, you're also constructing at the same time. And when you're constructing, you're deconstructing at the same time. Both are inseparable. So in these moments of deconstruction, there's something new that might emerge. Maybe it's more motivation for something, or maybe it's a new insight, or even it could be joy. So, so whenever one is deconstructing, it always leads to some sort of new creation, like you see with this person making this house of cards. So this idea of deconstruction and something new emerging from it may seem sort of theoretical and abstract, and that's what I was hoping to get, at least in this part. But there are a lot of other examples out there of what this could look like. The first one is this really wonderful practice called kintsugi. And kintsugi, besides being the best death cab for cutie album, by the way, is a Japanese practice of breaking a ceramic and then taking the broken pieces and putting them back together and making something beautiful out of it. So what's interesting about kintsugi is it started as an accident hundreds of years ago. There was this tea bowl that needed repairs, and it was so badly broken that the repairer couldn't actually put it back together and make it functional again. So the repairer actually just put it back together to make it really look beautiful, even though it didn't have any functionality anymore. And I think in a lot of ways, this is what we mean by this deconstruction and construction. We're taking something apart and then putting something back together, and something new and beautiful emerges out of it. Another example is blackout poetry, or you could say, blackout Donald Trump tweets as well. And so here we've got this great example of a blackout Donald Trump tweet. It might be a little small, so you might have to lean in to take a look at it. But so for, in blackout poetry, you're taking away words in a poem or in a writing and making something new, say, out of that. So, for this Donald Trump tweet, we've got, "Oh, pelican, so smoothly doth he crest," and something, and I don't know, whatever the last part is. But anyway, another great example, our favorite, Frank and Graham, our not so favorite, "I aggravate God tremendously." Another great example of some wonderful blackout poetry. So on a serious note, here's kind of what we'll be doing with Blackout Bible. We're going to be taking different, whether it's scriptures or poems or lyrics or whatever you find to be a scripture or sacred writing for yourself. You're going to take an example of that, and then you're going to sort of black out certain parts. There might be words that strike you that you want to highlight. There might be some phrases that you might be able to construct out of it that's for whatever reason you're being led to. And that's what the hope is for this practice. So these are actually a couple examples from my friend Ryan Cagle. Shout out Ryan Cagle. And so for this Psalm 61 example, out of Psalm 61 in his Blackout Bible, he did, "My prayer is faint, have you heard day after day." And so that's something that he was meditating on out of this Psalm 61. And he's got another one for Mark 2. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. If you don't quite still have an idea, here's an example I was doing the other day where I took a Psalm 73. And so you can kind of read this pericope from Psalm 73 Pericope, by the way, is a really good seminary word for those who haven't gone to seminary. So you've got your money's worth now. So I took it and made, to those who are pure, my steps nearly slipped. When I saw prosperity, no pangs until death, fat and sleek, the trouble, the stricken, the humankind. So that kind of gives you an idea of the practice that we'll be digging into. But what I also want you to do after you do your Blackout Bible or your Blackout poem or whatever it might be that you're blacking out is I want you to reflect on this question of, what am I being taught or led to or offered from this new creation that you're about to make? Why was it that you were being led to create what you created in your Blackout Bible or your Blackout poem or your Blackout lyric? Okay, I want you to sort of think and reflect on that, meditate on that. So like I mentioned before, whether it's a scripture from the Bible or a poem, a Mary Oliver poem, if you will, or a lyric from your favorite band, whatever it might be, it could be Coldplay if you're a big Coldplay fan. I want you to engage in some sort of blacking out of either a scripture, a poem, or a lyric. So what I would recommend doing is either doing this on like a computer or a tablet or a piece of paper or a phone even. And I'm sure you'll be able to figure out ways where you can kind of black it out. Like I was on my Psalm 73, I was able to change the text background or the text background color to black it out. But figure out a way to black it out. You might even want to print out a piece, and if you need to take a little bit of time to do that, that's totally fine too. So I'll give you about 10 to 15 minutes. I do have a 10-minute timer, but if we need to go a little bit longer, that's totally fine too. But you can feel free to turn off your camera, find a place that's comfortable. Again, engage in some sort of scripture. I can leave, or you can use Psalm 73 as an example, or if you want to actually use that. Again, feel free to do what you need to do. Take a piece of scripture from your own tradition, or a poem that really has resonated with you lately, or a lyric that you really like. So take whatever you need to do. And then what we'll do is, after all of that, reflect on that question of, what am I being led to or offered in this new creation that you make? And then what we'll do is, after we kind of reconvene after that time, we'll break you out into small groups and you can reflect with one another a little bit on what practice was like for you, okay?